I started playing Ramdas, you know, there are a lot of Bloods and Crips in the room, and this guy he's been shot 9 times and big gangbanger, and he was just bawling. And the next day, he's just telling me about how he thought the music and it saved his life, is his words.
From ceremony to stage, from SoundCloud to Sundance, East Forest has become a bridge between soul and sound. In today's conversation, we go way beyond the surface. We talk about how music became his medicine, how his new documentary, Music for Mushrooms, unfolded as both a creative act and a spiritual reckoning. Whether you're a space holder, a seeker, or someone who's been cracked open by a single note, this one's for you. Let's drop in with East Forest.
Whether you're a life coach, therapist, biohacker, invested in wellness, or in the healthcare profession, if you have an intention to work in psychedelic spaces, you're in the right place then. If you're called, get involved. But first, get informed. Let's talk the 4 N's: intake, intention, in-space integration, leading to deeper transformations. Psychedelic Coach Podcast, Talk Cole. Walk you through the process, it's all possible. Leave space for the follow through. Most importantly, integration is not optional.
For anyone listening right now, if you've been in the psychedelic space, if you have looked for playlists, if you have tried to curate the perfect playlist, then there's no way you didn't stumble across East Forest. It's an impossibility at this point. Plus, if you factor in I live in Austin, Texas, it is a double impossibility to not have come across your work. So just for maybe some of the listeners that aren't familiar with you, you've got a documentary out, you're doing all this amazing stuff with music. Let's backtrack a little bit on who you are for anyone that might be new to you.
When you're saying that, I was thinking back to 2008 when this East Forest thing emerged through my own explorations with music and mushrooms, and I had this big, I don't know what to call it, happening, occurrence, awakening, like this merging of an album I made in my own experience, and that was enough. That was way more than enough. But I started sending the music out, and back then there weren't a lot of podcasts about psychedelics. There was the Psychedelic Salon, which was Lorenzo Haggerty, and he's like OG, was the guy holding it down out there. And he would play old recordings, like tape recordings of like McKenna or Huxley or really anybody. And that was like the place to get the education, because there also weren't a lot of articles and so forth. So I sent him an email, and it was one of those synchronicities where he said something like, I never checked this email, but I somehow did today, and thanks for sending your music, and I listened to it, and like I love it so much. And he played the whole record on the podcast. And I was like, and then as the cosmic joke would have it, it was like, I don't know, the gain was off. It was all distorted. Like, but he played the whole thing. And I just remember, like, back in those days, just wanting to share the music as a tool for people to, because like I had this crazy experience with it, and I was like, oh, I want more people just to have this in their toolkit. So it's really cool, 17 years later, that, and many albums later, that at least there's more tools out there, and I'm glad it's reaching some people, and I hope it can reach more, because so many people are coming into this space, and they're gonna do it in various ways, right? On their own, most likely. And I think from a harm reduction point of view, music by far is the most scalable, successful thing we can put out there to help people have more positive experiences.
Were you already working with psychedelics when you started the music, or what was the transition to even seeing the power of that?
Yeah, I'd had a few experiences with mushrooms and music, and mostly mushrooms and psychedelics. I think my first was when I was 19. And so for the next 10 years, I basically had stumbled into a couple experiences here and there where it aligned with music in ways that I was just like, what's happening? This is so, it's like, felt very, very important. It's difficult to describe, but there was something about how the music aligned with the medicine in that moment. And it was an inspiration to me, but I also didn't really know what to do with it because there wasn't a lot of information out there to n to do. And it also wasn't as much in pop culture, just things like you hear about, like, the Grateful Dead and so forth. So, the short answer is, yeah, I'd had some experiences, but I was inspired by those experiences to create that first record, and it's called The Education of the Individual Soul, and I was really making it because everything else I was doing wasn't working, and it was the first time I kinda gave up in a way on my prior projects and things. I just wanted to make music for myself that I thought was really unsellable or, like, not commercial. There was no genre. It was, like, experimental and long form. It really just had this purpose of, like, it was chasing or trying to illuminate this memory of a feeling I had had in those prior psychedelic experiences with music. So, I never anticipated that when I listened to that record on mushrooms a year later when I'd finished making it, I like, it was inspired by that, but I just thought I don't know. I didn't know what would happen, but it changed my life. Like, it felt like something was birthed in that moment, or like I'd created this musical tool without knowing what I was making. Like, my soul had cajoled my ego into making it to use in that moment so that I could to presage a new time, at least in my life, that was really important to me. And when I say, like, that was enough, it was enough. It was just it was very important to me, and I didn't quite anticipate that it would have any meaning to anyone else because there were, like, field recordings in there of my mom and basically everywhere I'd been in the last year, like the hikes, but also, like, my neighborhood in Brooklyn, and it was all m merging. But when I listened to it, I was listening to, like, a audio diary in a way of my last year with all this music kind of woven through there like a melodrama. And I just thought, well, that's just no one else would care about that, or it's not their mom. But there were these universal human truths in there, and I just started to see how it was having similar effects on friends of mine. And then a friend of mine just started setting up circles, Lewis, and he kept asking me to show up and play for them. And then we were just doing that for years and years and years. And it became a plant medicine church. Eventually, it's just a little bit upstate of the city. And through that, it was just extremely pragmatic in a way of just what works and is working to help guide people through an experience. And after you do that for a long time, you start to have a protocol of sorts. And part of that, a lot of that was the music. Like, what was the music, and creating music and recording music live in those spaces became my practice.
Yeah, there's something to that when you look at the indigenous background of music in ceremonies, say in ayahuasca ceremonies, even if they're singing the same songs, you're a different person in every performance, even of the same material. And so just from an integration perspective, I've personally and friends worked with your music as part of an integration tool as well, not even just
Uh-huh.
during the experience itself, but to remember if there was one part that was particularly potent, because it's always about reconnecting to the spirit of that plant or fungi, not just the moment, but it's like the echo of it to embody it on a day-to-day practice. So for you, like once the music stops, what has that practice been? Like you made the music and then you started to share the music with other people. What did start to change in your life that it was like, oh no, this is becoming my life, actually, like this music that I created?
It was because my friend Lewis he kept setting up these circles to play for. And so I was being invited into this space. And as difficult as it was, I would see over and over again, like the next morning after the ceremony, I just hear from people about what they were working with, or the, the work that they were doing, that this music was really just setting the stage, the backdrop, or making a container for them to do that. And it was very humbling. Like, it was like, oh, this is clearly, they had an experience that was really, really helpful for them, really important to them. And you feel like you're a host of a party. You're part of these hosts. And in that way, I just felt like that was bigger than me. And when you're of service to people in any way, it's very rewarding. And so that in itself fed moving forward with it. And it stayed in that zone for, I would say, until 2014. So, 6 years is really just this underground thing. And even from there, I started to perform it out in some yoga festivals and South by Southwest, and it's just started to get out a little bit with it, but not really sure like what road or path that could take, and not anticipating how the culture would shift as well.
Sure. So were you mostly, like, living your life as a musician overall? Like, because I'm always curious,
Right.
because my husband and I come from musician backgrounds, that's how we met, so then we took music into ceremony because that was natural. So
Yeah.
was that already what your life was? And so, I mean, I'm so
Yeah.
curious.
Well, I had an interest in music all my life, yes, but and like mostly through public school growing up, just did everything music I could. In college, took a lot of music classes, but I was also into other things. I was wanted to make films, and I was an actor. And then I went to graduate school for acting right out of college, and was that was my main focus. And I was doing that's why I moved to New York, and I was doing the whole acting thing in my 20s. But my day job was taking pictures, like doing portraits, which was a great job, and my passion was music. And so I started a band, and I was in other bands, and I was doing a lot of music, and the photography gave me the flexibility to do all that, and I would do the acting jobs when they came up. But it wasn't until this experience in 2008 that, like, everything just aligned in a way where it was so kind of obvious that music was the thing that was the most direct path to, like, an expression of the soul and so forth. And acting was just sort of silly in some ways. Like, there were so many things in the way of that, or all these things that have to happen for you even to have the opportunity to do that, and then it's very ephemeral at that. And photography, which I really enjoy, was truly my job, so I wasn't concerned about, like, do I do that or not? And so I moved to Portland after this experience with my girlfriend at the time, and so that's when I kinda left photography behind and left acting behind, and that's when I made the transition to music, and it was a very slow, making a little money, and then a little bit more the next year, and just a little bit more the next year, and really hustling. I would drove around the whole country in my Prius with my gear in the back, playing any yoga studio that would have me to do little ceremonies or play in yoga classes. I didn't even know anything about yoga, but I was like, "Well, these are the people who will have me." So I was like, "I'll show up in whatever city," and I was just building it step by step that way.
I love that. That's that, when we're truly living in presence from my context, that is what we're doing though. When we're truly
Yeah.
present, we're following things that don't always make sense. And usually friends or family are like, what are you doing? Like, you need to get your life together, you know?
Oh, my friends thought I was crazy. We go up to the farm and do these ceremonies, and so it'd be 20 people roughly a ceremony. So come back, I'd be like, I remember having drinks with a friend of mine in some restaurant and in the city, and she's like, "What'd you do this weekend?" I was like, "Well, I was upstate. We did these mushroom ceremonies." She's like, "What? So you went up to party?" He's like, "No, there were like 40 people, and like it was really deep and powerful and beautiful." And they were just like, "You're fucking crazy. Like just taking drugs and going upstate, and you keep doing this." And no concept that it was anything beyond that. And I mean, you couldn't even really talk about it online. There was only this Reality Sandwich was this website that was sort of the hub, and they couldn't even get advertisers of any kind really because it was like, "Don't touch," it was still considered even with the expansion there is today, there's still a bit of that, I mean, it was in the news today, like, there's still quite a bit of ignorance and judgment around it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I grew up Mormon in Utah. So not only that, got
Yeah.
into the rave scene in the late 2000s, but I ended up in a coma from a contaminated batch of GHB. So I became the poster
Wow.
child for parents don't let your kids, go out, whatever. And so it was 6 years after that I got introduced therapeutically and from a shamanic perspective. And that was terrifying,
I
for like my
bet.
family, for my friends, for whatever. And yet, I was also tired of lying. I was also tired of not being open and transparent. And the truth was, working with fungi, working with great facilitators, because I'm blessed that at that age, I had great community and great people with 30 plus years experience, many that had been indigenous trained. And so I got to really understand that at a core level at that point. And in fact, one of the people involved in your project, Roots, is, someone that is one of our dear friends and that we love. And really in this documentary, I'm curious, like, how did you go from, like, the music part? So you've been doing the music. I know the tour life. I used to use the couchsurfing.org to get
Me
shows.
too.
Yep, back in
I
the
did too.
day.
So Far Sounds did, yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
And doing so I understand that hustle and everything too. And for us, a fruitful month for me was I'd walk away with $1,400 after expenses, and I'm like, living
That's huge success, yeah.
like living the life. But that's the thing is like most people can't endure that, because it is so uncomfortable and so uncertain. But when you're following it, there's no choice. So I feel like that had to inevitably lead you towards trusting even creating this documentary. How did that come into play where you're like, okay, we have the film background, the power of mushrooms, and then getting this message out even more about music? Walk me through how that came into play.
I think I'm just a little bit crazy. Part of it was being naive in what I was getting into. I did have a background film and in photography and even the acting. Like I was interested in these constituent parts. So I always thought, oh, that could be fun. But it was really my friend and I 3 or 4 years ago were shooting some stuff. Like he was getting into video and I needed some content. Like it was like a little biographical video, like a 4 minute thing that we had to create, and some music videos I had to do for a contract distribution thing. And so I hired him and we were just making these videos. And in doing that, we shot stuff that felt like, oh, this could be part of a documentary. And I just we kept shooting things. And it really just unfolded from there, where I eventually needed some more help. And I met this guy, John Dahlgren, and we started shooting more. And then we're like, oh, we need some funding. And then by the grace of all that is, like, we did get some private investment. And that's when it got quite real, because now you're like, I, there's people relying, we have to actually do this. So then you start getting more help, and then you're kind of off to the races. And then it became this big juggernaut. But it was a blast. Like the collaborative nature of it was by far the most challenging creative thing I've ever done, and way more difficult than making a record, but also very satisfying to like work with people who are experts in various fields and getting to collaborate and much more like a team. And so we worked so hard on the story and the editing. Rachel Clara Reed is the editor, and I want to give props to her for helping craft what it is. And so now it's really just about letting people know about it. We made it to inspire people, particularly those curious about this sort of work. Maybe not fully on board, but they're like, maybe I've heard about this. And I wanted to make a film that was very grounded, and hopefully you see yourself in the film somewhere, and like it speaks to you personally in that way.
Was that kind of the goal, is to have more vulnerability on film and involving family and other storytelling? Was that a conversation you had ahead of time, or did you have any trepidation, like personally in the project of
Yeah.
what's too much, like what's that? How do you determine that line?
I didn't want to be at the center of it at all. I wasn't even supposed to direct it initially. And then eventually it was like directing it by default because we didn't have a director at any point. But we learned over and over again through when I'd work with story consultants. And first we're working on paper for a while. And everyone kept telling me, and I was just learning about making a documentary. You have to have, first off, someone you're following along with, but more importantly, they have to be vulnerable. They have to struggle. It's like the oldest thing about storytelling, and or be very self-deprecating, or hopefully all of those things, and have some humor in there. It's just critical, and there's just no way around it. So eventually, I just got so used to that process over a couple years. Eventually, it was very strange being like removed from being objective about what I was seeing in the footage. I'd be like, I don't care about this. I mean, talking about myself, like, nope, that doesn't connect, or like that feels fake, or there's not enough there, or we didn't capture it on film, or this feels really like there are parts in the movie I don't like to watch because they're uncomfortable for me, but I know they serve the story. So that's why they're there. But I remember when it came out, because you're so wrapped up all sorts of aspects, like the color, all these little things. And then eventually it's out and you're like, I'm sitting there in a theater watching it with people. And it's like, geez, that's my bedroom. Like, I don't look so good in this shot. Like I look kind of like a jerk and and I was a little bit freaked out at that point, but it's a done deal. So I'm sure it humanizes me on certain levels, but so maybe it knocks me down a few pegs on people's projections that they may or may not have. But that's what makes it a better film. Whether or not you even care about me or this subject, hopefully it's a compelling story.
Mhm. Yeah, any sort of reflection around the topic, I'm in for it, It's like I feel like there can't be too much information. Well, I guess that's conversation for another day, but as you were going through filming the project, I'm curious, like, how do you approach it to have this awareness of staying present and not performative, or at least acknowledging the moments where it's like, "Oh, I was, like, performing this piece for it to translate, but I'm recognizing now it was not totally authentic, even if it was genuine desire?"
Yeah, I mean, there's a camera there, right? So you're aware. There are certainly moments where I was less aware of the camera or cared less. Like there's a scene in it near the end. It's sort of a climax. I mean, I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'll just say that I was in a fight backstage with a guy who was trying to help me, but it was right. We were having all these problems technically, and I was really freaking out. And my buddy John had been filming for 3 weeks on tour, so, like, I'm aware there's a camera there and I'm fine, but at the same time, I was so used to it at that point, I was far more concerned about, like, what was going on. And ironically, one of my friends, Mark, who's the other filmmaker who wasn't there, he thought that scene was staged. I was like, "That's the one." I mean, that's right, that's the least staged, so I'm like, "That's so funny." He's like, "Oh, I can't believe you would have captured that." I was like, there's so many things we didn't capture. We're in the moment, and I go back later, I'm like, "John, why didn't you film that?" He'd be like, "That was too crazy," or like, "I was afraid." I was afraid too, but it would have been a great film. So, and inevitably, there are things you have to film to piece the story together, inevitably. And that's okay. That's part of the filmmaking process. Like, as long as what you're saying, you might have gone out and set it up, but it's like, well, what I'm saying on film, it's the truth, or it's like, for instance, I really late in the process, there's a quick scene where I'm up on the hillside here in Boise playing harmonium and singing. I mean, if you think about it, I'm like, well, of course, you probably weren't there and magically there's a camera there. I mean, yeah, we went up there because it's like, I need a shot of me singing outside. It was just strange. It's more energetic. There's a rhythm to making movies like that where you can't know until the moment, but you get into the editing and it's like, oh, there's a lot of talking, there's this and that, we've been indoors, or there's too much of my face, or whatever it is. And you're like, like the scene of me braiding Rada's hair was a late addition. And that was because I suddenly thought, there's so many scenes of Rada supporting me, and you don't see me supporting her. And we need to see that, not me
Mhm.
just saying it. This is the old thing, you gotta show versus tell, because that will help balance people caring for both of us, but also me. And that's just balancing out the temperature, so to speak, of a character and the side stories between her and I. And I do braid her hair, but of course I'm like, I need you to shoot me braiding her hair, which I probably was gonna do anyway. It's like, and then we put it in the movie, and it's like those little things are like stitching together a story. It's like you write with scenes or images in that way, and because it's your life, it's awkward to make a script of something that's going to be your life, but you have to do that because if you don't, you'll probably just have a lot of expensive B-roll. You won't have a story. You'll be searching for a story and all this footage, and it's like
Uh,
you got to
I
plan
don't
it
know
out.
anything about that life. No, I know everything about that life. I have a lot of B-roll going nowhere east, a lot of B-roll going nowhere.
Well, when you go the verite approach, shooting like real life, so to speak, which is what we did. Like, there are some interviews where I'm talking to people, but there's a lot of stuff that's verite, and it's a risky thing to do with docs because it's life. So if either you don't capture it or it doesn't read or you don't get what you need through all that, then you have expensive B-roll. It's just not really useful to the film.
Totally. How do you feel like in through this process and in seeing the final product, what is kind of your wish for the project? Because you mentioned it that it inspires people, but inspires people to do what or to feel what?
It's meant to inspire them because I think a lot of us feel that we're victims and we want to counter that message to say, actually, your role is very important and everything happens, all change happens from the inside out. Like your inner work really matters for us to transition and thread the needle we want to thread as a people. So it's inspiring us into inner work and inspiring a person to take that next step back onto their path or on their path and showing that that's likely what's right in front of you, like your family, your friends, the way you treat yourself too. It's step one to the recognition and actions in the world to help right injustices, but also to create more cooperation.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like until you have that awareness of yourself, you can't even hold space for other people in their processes. And I'll hear and observe people talking about maybe understanding systemic or oppressive things while not understanding how those are playing out within themselves. And without that awareness, then the change can't even occur. We can't even begin the work until there's like some internal alignment with it. And that's where I think music is such a confrontational without the same conflict by going through a feeling and a sound versus like the direct, some kind of limited language of English.
Yes. Yeah, music is a great guide because it communicates through feeling and or it's particularly instrumental music, and that's where the real wisdom is. And it's also that's the language of psychedelics is feeling and understanding through essentially emotion and feeling. It's not necessarily the ideas can be there, but they're really the deeper levels is through your body. So music's the language of metaphor, the language of the unseen, and that's why it works so well.
Mhm. I feel like that's so much of what is inspiring more of like the light language and different languages people can speak as they do this work, or what it's for me, it's whether or not we call it a language, but there is an emoting that happens as a result of the tones and things that they hear. Because you can really only mimic things you've heard in some capacity. When I look at someone like Snow Raven, who is amazing and I love her work, there is this thing that changes because of music that unlocks within you and like dimensional doors and spaces it carries you as a result of the not just listening with your ears, but actually listening from your heart, actually listening from your pores and your cells. And so as you sat, especially the first few years and witnessed people as you did music, was there anything or a time that you were like blown away by what someone experienced because you saw it or like felt or witnessed it in some kind of way?
Yeah. Yeah, mostly stories I would hear from them reporting afterwards. There's a scene in the film where we're playing some music for a foundation called New Earth Foundation. It's transitional youth out of LA County. And they went on this retreat. A lot of them haven't even been out of LA before. I mean, they went up to southern Utah, which is this expansive landscape. And Harry Grammer, who runs it, wanted me to play a ceremony for them without any drugs or medicine, just the music and this ceremony container. I was very nervous, thinking they would walk out or judge me. And these are unruly teenagers, like all teenagers, and from completely different background than me. And I started playing and I started singing and I noticed they're just like, what the hell is this? And then I started playing Ram Dass and they just, several of them just cracked right open. And the one who was weeping the whole time was the kind of hardest dude in the room, you know. There are a lot of Bloods and Crips in the room, and this guy just he's been shot 9 times and big gangbanger, and he was just bawling. And the next day, he's just telling me about how he thought the music and it saved his life. Is his words. I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's just like, "I basically," he's like, "I saw." It was just cathartic in a way that I think he'd never had anything like that. He'd never been able to drop the guard, probably the armor, and then all that trauma naturally being processed just as a waterfall. I mean, I didn't do that, but I helped. I just played the music, and the music is helping him, and it just showed me that it's beyond us. Like there's so many things that can happen for people if we just gift it and set the stage. It doesn't actually have to be that complicated.
It's that, I think, especially with music, the fact that you are following this like calling with your heart and one step at a time, and as you described, kind of a long process going into music in the way that it is now. And as someone that was what is considered an at-risk youth, and so which means I was also surrounded with a lot of at-risk youth, for many, no one ever even slowed down enough for there to be space for them to consider, for them to feel, for them to not, like you said, be worried about their life in that moment. And just for that little amount of space, for me, that's how I see that when we talk about the oneness, when we talk about consciousness, I think that it can get a very, very lost when we say it in such a generalized way. When you bring music in, that's where I feel like you really see it. That even if you're playing the music, even if you composed the music ahead of time, when you're connected, then you realize it's the prayer everyone collectively had to even be in that room in that moment to inspire whatever, like opening or unlocking or timing, because I feel like that timing is such a big component. And I appreciate so much that you trusted yourself to just continue forward when it didn't make sense. And, to know now with the documentary, and it's another opportunity for people to see the power of music. We see it in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. We see what it's doing in totally different areas of life. But I'm curious for you, do you feel like the music flows through you from some like, source or greater intelligence and you're just kind of documenting it, or a combination of both, study and then other moments of more of a channel type vibe?
Well, I don't think I'm anything unique in that way. I think that's what all creativity or music is, especially when you're improvising. It's just what you choose to literally channel it into. And I'm just choosing to funnel it into this sort of plant medicine space. Or just even broader than that, it's like inner guidance or music that's deeply emotional, yet not sentimental, I hope. And that is inherent to music's potentiality. It can do so much. It's like a multi-tool. But I also think it's deeply human. And so while music's the most present it's ever been, I also think like we really haven't fully harnessed its the breadth of its potential. And yet it's like water and wind flowing through us and around us. It's actually quite natural, like we were saying with like those kids. So I think when you get into kind of flow states or however you want to talk about it, uh, that's what musicians love, and I love that, and that happens for sure. But it's kind of these waves, just like life, like you're flowing in and out of it, and it's a conversation, and it's a conversation between like your technique and that's the practicing, the shedding you've done. But in the moment, like where do those ideas come from? They're in all of us in that way. I, I don't know. My own humanity can get in the way, and it's often I can look back. I don't tend to look back at the work a whole lot, but maybe I journeyed to it or something, or I'm hearing it for some reason, particularly in that space, the journey space, and I'll hear it in a fresh way of I can hear sometimes the intention in there, or I can hear like something else bigger than myself, hopefully speaking through.
Hmm. When one of my, this has been a big theme around voice and how much people are silenced or dimmed or they withhold or they're afraid of saying the wrong thing or whatever. And I'm with you that it's whether you're sitting alone in your car and you're humming and just rocking yourself, it's of the same when it's authentic, when it's completely just present. Sometimes it can be as simple as your voice starts to crack, but that's it though. Like that raw emotion of something as simple as that it is this prayer, it is this presence, it is this creation. And I'm curious, after years of exploring sound and working with plant medicines and different tools, master teacher tools, what's exciting you the most right now? Because the documentaries here, which I'm sure there's excitement, But what is on the horizon now that the documentary is here?
I'm the most challenged and excited by the live space and performing, I suppose, in a more traditional way, like in theaters, and what you can do in that space. It's the most challenging thing next to playing ceremonies, mostly because of like the physical toll of it and just like just the machinations of selling tickets and promotion and that whole thing and the whole thing is is a juggernaut, but it's the leading edge currently for me of where a lot of my thoughts are and preparing and getting ready for some touring later this year.
I love that. And so for the documentary, where can people access it? How can they go watch it? Because we've talked about it and we've talked about, some of the storytelling and vulnerable parts. If you were to, aside from the like storytelling part, what would you say that the story is about? Because we've talked about you being in it and some other people, but what would you say is kind of the story arc of it?
Well, I mean, literally the story arc is me having my experience with mushrooms and then wondering if there's a safe way or ethical way, or does it matter, how would this scale, or does it meet the moment that we find ourselves in, and is it meaningful and needed? And so I'm exploring that, and then you see that happening, and then my own personal struggles that I'm trying to overcome to do that. And then I'm, of course, meeting people, and they're sharing their things and their vulnerability along the way, along with some information, whether it's scientists or indigenous leaders or artists. But I guess it's about in the backdrop of it all is the context of the collapse we're in as a society and the transition we're in, and that change is happening. It's afoot. There's no doubt about that. And how deep is the knife going to cut? And it feels like it's going to do a lot more and go a lot deeper as our lives go on. So it's about having inner fortitude and being prepared for that, and having the skills and support in order to face what we need to face. Like, what is the calling of our time now? And I think we each have a very important role to play, and it's unique to each of us. And only we need to choose or get to choose exactly how that unfolds. And that's the whole, like, we're not totally just victims here. Your choice matters. So in that way, that's the inspiration to say, like, you can do this, or like, step forward, or like there's support out there, and maybe you'll see something in the movie that sort of you feel like you might want to go in that direction, or like that, or a different practitioner or something like that. But it's all a process, right? There's no particular destination for any of us, including like in the larger scheme of things. It's
Mhm.
just process and more process. But I think we can all use some singing too, and some support.
What
Oh,
do you
and you asked where they can see it. It's
Yes.
musicformushrooms.com.
Yes.
And maybe we can do a screening week or something through your podcast, but we've been gifting it through just particular like select partners like that. And otherwise, you can just rent it for a few bucks at musicformushrooms.com anytime you want.
I love it. I'm curious now with the documentary, with your music, what is East Forest's role currently, if you were to name it, at least where it is right now?
Well, that's a big question, because I think the world is changing so fast that I'm needing a little support and inspiration in ways that just how to like the role that I'm meant to play in this moment. And it's a little less clear, but I find myself leaning more back on the music as opposed to, it's almost like doing less versus more. I
Mhm.
think when I was younger, it was always doing more. And there's some kind of message now about focusing in, and it feels like there's a reason for that that's still waiting to be revealed, but that's necessary for something that's like coming our way in a way. And I sense these tidal waves in the distance, and I can't say that I'm preparing. Maybe I am, maybe I don't know, but I'm trying to follow an intuition of setting the stage for something like, I'm not quite sure.
No, I love that. The exact conversation I had with our team today was that the focus is deeper, not wider, where we got caught up in the more like impact more lives and more people and whatever. And in the last month, we realized actually our role is way less, much deeper because I have a background as a facilitator in the underground, plus all my years of my own personal work. And that turned into how we support others in the space, like running retreats and how do you organize and all of that. And we were trying to, what we thought, help a lot more people. And now what we realize it's about actually the focus and the deeper with less people, at least on a one-to-one or a in-person basis. And then, more stuff people can do digitally if they want to learn other skills or tools or strategies. Because similar to you, I don't know why. I can approximate, I can make up based off of some data what I think, but I know that anytime if I focus too hard on the horizon, then I can miss the mark because I'm not paying attention to also the data in any present moment and what's presenting itself for like these small shifts along the way. So I definitely resonate with it. And as we kind of bring this episode, what is your wish for the people listening with these changes or these tides that are coming? If you were to leave them a wish or a prayer, what would you hope for them, either through the documentary or other things they're exploring and finding?
Well, not to lose hope. I know it's sort of, for some people, a lot of us, just it's kind of a looking away or putting the head in the sand, being tired, being exhausted by the pace, let alone the suffering, and it feeling just there's no way to be effective against that. And our collective voices really matter when it's as little as like 3.5% of us I've heard. That's that's like to what, 12 million people in America. It's a lot of people, but it's also not. And so it's like to share your feelings and your voice and not to be afraid to have feelings and not to be afraid to express those in a sense of solidarity and to resource yourself so that you're coming from a place where at least you know what it feels like to have your feet on the ground. And that's where practice and doing your best to have, things that can help you be a clear vessel that way. But we have to have a diversity of community so they can reflect back on us so we're not in delusion as well. It's very easy today to get into reality tunnels with social media or whatnot, where you're just kind of seeing one thing or just what you want to see. And it's reaffirming a particular viewpoint that is going to feel extremely real because that's all you're seeing and hearing and being validated on. And it's tricky because there's not even a shared objective truth on certain regards. But not that psychedelics are a panacea, but on a certain level, at a certain dose, there's nowhere to run. And you face what you face. And that can be some real work. But as you bring that into your life, into the world, I think on certain levels, what is a true response, but you can get into delusion. And so perhaps one litmus test can be like, are the actions or choices I'm making ultimately about an us versus an I? Ultimately, that could be a North Star. If you want to try, like, I don't have anyone to talk to. I don't know what to do. How do I know if I'm moving in the right direction? I'm like, that's a general sense. Like if you understand that we're all one thing, then theoretically serving other people makes the most sense and should be natural and enjoyable because it's like, well, it's me too. It's all of us. That's it. I'm not just this isolated individual. But we're in the face of a time of incredible change and injustice, and I think it's going to get crazier. So finding support and community in others is quite critical, and finding things that resource you on a day-to-day basis, very important. And taking it easy because, like, it's okay to feel despondent at times. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, like, wow, I really lost my way there. That's okay. We're here to learn. We're here to have grist for the mill. That is the point of being here. So that's actually good. The friction is the point. but there's a lot of brave souls that incarnate now, and I think we're going to put it right to the test, right up to the line.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast with Deborah Silverman, who's an astrologer, and it was on Cal Callahan's
Yeah, no
podcast
doubt.
called The Great Unlearned. Yeah.
Yep.
And she said something that stuck with me so strong. She said, the world of the earth this time is going through a birth. And if you had never seen a woman birth before with her screaming and everything that's happening, you would think something is going terribly wrong if you didn't have context. And and it seems like she's in so much pain because she is. And she's like, so if you can view this time, I'm paraphrasing, if you can view this time as a birth that you've never witnessed, it's as scary as it is, as loud as it is, as overwhelming as it can be at times, does not mean that everything is wrong. It means that everything is changing. And it doesn't mean everyone's going to like it. And it doesn't mean, we have to like the things we're grateful for. But like you so beautifully said, it's knowing when to pause for yourself. It's knowing that there are going to be times of overwhelm. There's going to be times of hopelessness, even. For me,
Yeah.
I've experienced it, and just seeing the seasons of it, seeing the making sure you have community to reflect, to check in on you, and really increasing your capacity to feel and tolerate people not like you, going through things that you haven't been through, that you might never understand, is the way through, where I can still be with you and not agree, but without shutting down or being reactive, because I have a level of sovereignty with my own emotions and what I'm experiencing.
Yeah. Side note on Cal, he gave me a sweatshirt that said "Unlearn" upside down for his podcast years ago, and there was a picture of me wearing it, and I threw into ChatGPT, "Make me into a dog with blah blah blah," and I was wearing that, and it spit out an image of me as a dog, but it for some reason changed the lettering on the shirt to say "unclean." I was like, "What's that all about?" But to your analogy, imagine it from the baby's perspective. You're in this perfect womb. And then suddenly one day everything starts to constrict and get really tight and you going through a tunnel. You think you're gonna die, probably. Like it's that stressful. But then a new life begins in a completely new universe that you didn't know existed. So it's an apt analogy.
Yeah. Well, this has been a really great conversation, and I appreciate your time, not only with me today, but everything you've been through, endured, decided to follow off of that intuition. And my invitation is anyone listening, you might be saying to yourself, yeah, but I'm not East Forest. I can't make music. All of that is complete horseshit. And once you sit with certain indigenous people in the jungle, you're not going to hear a Michael Bublé in the jungle, probably, right? Like, but it's the rawness that is the impact, that is the music, that is the song. And so whatever that song is for you, go to the retreats, go work with someone like Snow Raven or Marin Azoff, or if East Forest is doing events, go listen, not just to take it in, but to observe and to see what's possible for your own creativity. Because for me, that is such a huge path of many people's healing, is collaborating as well, not just holding their songs to themselves, but allowing
Mm.
themselves
It's all about intention. That's really all that matters.
to. Anything else you'd like to share that we haven't before we end the episode for today?
Well, come see me out there on the road. Just go to eastforest.org and check out where we're playing live, or just get on the newsletter. We'll let you know when we're coming to your area. And I'm excited for that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, and I will be keeping an eye on those dates as well.
All right. Well, thank you. It's nice to meet you, and had a good time.
Me too. Thank you.